Greetings. My name is Kate Rademacher, and I'm delighted to be here with Writing for Your Life. We are today interviewing a longtime friend of Writing for Your Life, Tony Jones. And Tony has just published a new book called The God of Wild Places, which I was really honored to get a pre-read of. So I've been enjoying it, and we were just chatting about it. So before we dive into hearing more about Tony, your new book, first of all, welcome. Thanks. Welcome back to Writing for Your Life, and thanks for being with us. And can you just, for those of you who aren't familiar with your work or background, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, sort of where you are in your journey, and how, maybe then after that we can hear how this book came to be.
Sure. Well, Kate, thanks for having me on. And I love the Writing for Your Life community and have since its inception. And some of your viewers and listeners may remember me from doing some of the conferences in the past and always just absolutely love those opportunities. And it's funny because we can circle back to this, but I've taught a class. I've taught a workshop, or I can't remember exactly what they were called, seminars at those conferences about memoir writing, which I had not written a memoir, but I had been like rabidly consuming memoirs and books about memoirs, which is, a real niche subgenre. Books by memoirists about how to write good memoirs. It finally I have is it a memoir or not? I mean, we can debate that, but um, I am sitting in Edina, Minnesota, where I live. I live 2 blocks from the house in which I was reared. My mom still lives there. She's a widow. She's 80, and I'm due to go change a couple light bulbs for her later today. I'm uh yeah, I'm a guy who loves this place. I really love Minnesota. I'm crazy about this state. And I have a lot of connections here and a lot of family. Um I grew up as a real church kid in a congregationalist church that was kind of center, very center, not even center right or center left, just like as far as I can tell, looking back, right down the center, and didn't even understand really that there was a thing called evangelicalism or the main line until I went to college and got involved in an evangelical campus ministry. And that's when my eyes were open about kind of what was and I think all that stuff was bubbling up in Christianity in the late 80s. Some of the culture wars that we now see happening within Christianity were just getting their start when I was in college. After college, I went straight to seminary at Fuller in California because I was definitely going to be a pastor. And then got out of there in 93 and worked for a youth mission organization. I touched briefly in the book on living on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, which I say in the book was the time in my life where I felt most Christian. Uh, that Christianity just made the most sense to me while I was in this kind of radical service to the Lakota people of Pine Ridge. That was a long time ago now, though. Then I worked as a pastor. And that's when I started writing books at just a frantic pace, which was kind of the story of my life. Enneagram 8, very driven and ambitious, and so I just did, and a lot of that stuff, which we can talk about, was to cover up some real pain in my personal life that was happening at the same time. Uh, After 7 years as a pastor, I went to Princeton Seminary for a PhD. And I was also, and some of your viewers will know this about me probably, that I was very involved in the emerging church movement for 10 years. And that's where I kind of became like whatever, a C-list Christian celebrity, um, and wrote a lot of books. And they were very different than this book for sure. But yeah. And then also uh, raised 3 kids. I'm married to an incredible human being who teaches yoga and teaches the Enneagram and is a professional photographer and saved my life in many ways. And I've got dogs. We're empty nesters now. Our kids are all out, so we've rearranged the house. We couldn't be happier. It's so quiet,
Yes.
Kate.
Oh man.
It's just awesome. So yeah, that's
I'm
kind of
hearing
me.
I'm 3 months away from this, and I'm
Uh,
like in senior slump of parenting and adulting. So, yes, I look
we
forward to your.
just our my youngest is just a first year student at college. So we just became empty nesters in the fall. And I like when I got back from dropping him at college, the first thing I did when I came home was like listed all of his bedroom furniture on Craigslist. It was gone in 24 hours. And we just like, we're starting over. We're refinishing the hardwood floors. We're carpeting the stairs. We're,
Yes.
yeah,
Well, that's my life. My yeah,
it's
we're
awesome.
we're sending our youngest to college, and I counted the date. I literally counted the
I know
not
a lot of my
not that
friends are like, "Oh, I miss my kids so much." I'm like, they're great human
totally.
beings, but it was time for them to go."
Exactly. And you will miss them, and I will miss them
Sure.
desperately. So, speaking of which, this is a good maybe segue to hear about your new book, because as I was telling you before we started recording, I was wondering as I was reading it, thinking about midlife passages and midlife sort of reconciliation and reckoning. And so I was curious before we met and before this conversation, is this sort of your midlife book? And you said you're ambivalent about whether it's a memoir or not, and I can see why. So perhaps beyond the sort of genre, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your book and why you wrote it and sort of what you're doing, quote unquote, with this book. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And we can talk about the genre because it's a funny one. And I've got thoughts on that I think your viewers will be intrigued by, but um it's called The God of Wild Places because well, Um, that's the working title I came up with many years ago with my previous literary agent, Kathy Helmers, who's another friend of Writing for Your Life. And she kind of helped me conceive of the book. And she didn't end up representing it. Um, but Jonathan Merritt is my literary agent now, and he's been great. And Kathy and I are great, great friends, and et cetera, et cetera. Um, let's see what happened. My life fell apart, completely fell apart right when it was the dream, Kate. I got a contract with Harper One, Mickey Maudlin, another friend of Writing for Your Life. I finally got my big break, and my book came out 9 years ago this week when we're recording Holy Week. We're recording 9 years ago in 2015. That book came out, and I was supposed to preach at Mars Hill Bible Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The church Rob Bell founded, one of the most high profile churches in the country, on Palm Sunday. I was going to be the guest preacher. And then I was going to fly to New York and go on the O'Reilly Factor with Bill O'Reilly and debate him because I had a book called Did God Kill Jesus? He had a book called Killing Jesus. Everything was going great, except behind the scenes, I was going through a custody fight for my kids. I ended up getting custody of my kids, but stuff was posted about me online and my everything in 48 hours, everything fell apart. Everything fell apart. Like I lost it all. It was a terrible panic stricken time for me. And, those of us who are authors, everything always seems so tentative and tenuous, always like every publicity thing, every little marketing thing you get, it can just like evaporate. It just evaporated. Well, that was, of course, that wasn't just that 48 hours, Kate. I mean, like my life had been building to that disaster for many years, and that just whatever, the fuse ran to and finally hit the TNT and it blew up. And the church isn't so great at taking care of broken pastors. It might be good at taking care of broken parishioners, but I think a lot of people in the church didn't, and frankly in the Christian publishing world didn't quite know what to do with me after that. I was radioactive. One other fellow Christian author was like, "You're radioactive right now." And I get it looking back. I was very hurt and angry at the time, but I look back now and I'm like, I get it. People have their own things. They don't need the shrapnel from my disaster to be hurting them and their careers or whatever. So I was alone. I mean, I was married to Courtney and I got full custody of my kids, but my career was gone. Um, and I started going in the woods. I started hunting and fishing, going up to the Boundary Waters canoe area and paddling a canoe. Those were the things that brought me the life that I used to get out of organized religion. So the book is that journey. And I've been working on it for a long, long time. The first email I ever sent to Kathy Helmers about it was in 2012, uh, which was way too soon, and probably why she and I struggled with kind of the content of it. Because as Mary Carr says, you should not write about anything that's less than 8 years old. And so all this I needed to steep. My tea needed to steep before I could write about this. And here we are in 2024, and it's finally coming out.
Congratulations. And I'm sorry. Congratulations on the book publication. And I'm sorry if, for the context, for everyone, it just sounds really painful. And I'm just smiling because I'm um, a writer also, and currently serving as a managing director of Writing for Life. And I am trying to write a book that's, I think, too soon, and talk to Kathy, and all the things which are like we
Yeah.
want to. I think, and maybe this is a good question for you. Like, I think it's because I love to write and I want to keep writing, but when you're bringing your own lived experience, you do have to wait till God. I feel like till God's time. That's and
Mm,
so it's like maybe that's a theme I felt in your book too of the more of the rhythms of nature, giving up, surrendering and control and all the stuff. I think the humility of midlife,
yeah.
which I know I'm experiencing at the moment
Yeah.
in multiple ways. So, but tell us more about the book. I was asking you before we signed on about the tone, and I'm sort of touching on that. I mean, it's just hard for me to describe. I was trying to explain it to myself as I was reading it. Very quiet, sort of meditative,
Hmm.
very nature obviously based, as you just said. So sort of what intentionality did you bring to that as you were working on the style and the tone of the narrative?
Yeah. Great question. It's funny. My cousin texted me this morning, and I have a dear, dear cousin who has very serious cancer, and she read the book yesterday. She said, I read it in one day. And I said, it's funny. It took me 10 years to write my shortest book. Like, it's 160 pages. It's not a long book. And it took me 10 years. And I've written other books in much longer books in shorter periods of time. And I think it's such a better book. Because that's so interesting, that word you're using, quiet, because nobody would call me quiet. Like, nobody who knows me would be like, Tony, he's kind of a quiet guy. Nobody. And all my last books were loud and brash and funny and, in your face. And when I was a blogger, that was my persona. And when I am a public speaker, that's my persona. So I think because this book is so different, and because I spent so long on it, I really, um, every sentence, you know, every sentence, I read it now or look at it now, and I'm like, I remember working on that sentence. And I've never, because it's always been a churn, like, Tony, you have a book contract. You got to get your book out, hit the deadline and whatever. And this book was not like that. I had no contract for a while. I had no agent. I just really had to be motivated to write it for, like you say, just the love of writing it. I just had to write it. And then I also had some really pivotal conversations. I'll tell a quick funny story. I sent it to my dear friend Lauren Winner, who of course is a genius New York Times best-selling memoirist. And she said, I'll read it, but um, only if the next time I'm in Minneapolis, you have to pay for us to get pedicures, and I will sit next to you and give you my feedback. And to this day, Kate, it's the only pedicure I've ever had. But here's what I
That's
remember.
amazing.
Isn't that incredible? That's the most like Lauren
And I love
Winters.
that we have this on recording because we can send this to Lauren and just be like, this is in the public domain now. You
It's the
got
most
pedicures
Lauren
with
Winters
Tony.
story ever. Yeah. And so here's what I remember. I mean, she had all sorts of notes because she's a very beautiful, deep reader, right? But here's what I remember. oh, woe is me. Tony, it's so sad. Tony got divorced. That must be the worst. Oh, Tony lives in the suburbs and has a house and a dog and he got divorced. I'm
Uh-huh. That
like
sounds like
pull
Lauren
pull
also.
the knife out of my chest. Okay, gotcha. Yes, no, she's like, nobody wants to read how bad your divorce was. Like, get over it. Like, write
Yeah.
it, then delete it all. Get it all out of there. That
Mm,
is not what people want in a memoir. That's not
mm,
what any reader wants. And what you've been through isn't that you went through a terrible divorce and a custody fight. Like, that's not unique. What's unique about your story? So that really helped. That really helped. And then there were a few others. My dear friend Carla Barnhill, who for many years edited stuff for Mickey Maudlin at Harper One, she edited it for me a couple different times. And then Jonathan Merritt came along, and I was really stuck when I signed with Jonathan as my agent. And what a dear guy, because it's not like, he didn't sign it because I was going to get a big contract because I was starting over. But he goes, we worked hard, and this again, your viewers will appreciate this. He said, why don't you go back and read all of Barbara Brown Taylor's books? And he's like, and this is to the genre question. He said, you tell me, are those memoirs or not? I'm like, not really. They're memoir-ish. I call them memoir-ish.
yeah. I don't think they are.
They're like thematic. She
But
has,
she's a preacher. That's the thing. Deep down.
yeah.
Barbara started as a preacher, and I think that comes through in her writing. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're right. You're right. So and I'll tell you one little other Barbara Brown Taylor story, which is sweet. But so I started rereading all her books. Like, okay, how do you write personal stuff, but it's not a memoir, and it's definitely not. And then this happened, and then this happened. I mean, it's definitely not an autobiography. It's memoir-ish. It's thematic around stories from her own life and experience. And so one day I texted her and I was like, Barbara, I've been reading this. Jonathan told me I need to read all your books again, so I'm doing it. And I said, this is the hardest thing because I've always written these prescriptive books. Like, here's how you should pray. Here's how you should understand the church. Here's how you should understand the doctrine of the atonement. These are just some of the books I've written. Should. I'm like, I've read Learning to Walk in the Dark, and it's not prescriptive in that way. And she texted me back, Tony, should is male language. Women don't write
Oh my
should.
gosh, that's exactly what I was just thinking. How are you, Barbara? I was just thinking to myself, it's because it's a masculine
That's right.
framework and she's coming from a feminine framework. So, boom.
So,
Sorry.
Kate, I had to disabuse myself of the way I used to write. Tony's a preacher and a PhD in theology. He's going to tell you how you should understand the atonement better than how Thomas Aquinas understood it or something. And now it's like, no, I'm no more shoulding on my readers. And now I'm just going to write from my heart as much as I can. Maybe that's why it's quieter, but I've been mentored by three women and a gay man, to be less of my like Enneagram 8 aggressive cis dude self. And I'm still outdoorsy, it's still a book
Yeah.
about guns and dogs
Yeah.
and
Yes.
butchering deer, but
Yeah.
hopefully it's there's a little
Hmm.
little hint of Barbara Brown Taylor in there.
Well, and women butcher deer as well.
Of course.
Barbara may not, but
Yeah, right.
probably Barbara does. We don't know. She can. We'll have to have her on the
She
podcast to
lets
find out.
she lets there are a couple hunters that she and Ed let deer hunt on their property, and they are given some venison steak at the end of the hunting season.
Well, I'm
Barbara and
sorry.
yeah.
I'm to be clear for the record. This is in the public domain. My brother is a animal rights activist and a vegan and against
Mm.
in a the terrors of industrial farming. So
As am
that's
I, which is why I
yeah.
hunt. I mean, this is the interesting thing is that I probably have more in common with vegans than I do with a lot of other carnivores. Yeah.
Well, thank you for this conversation, which has gone in many directions that I wasn't expecting in a humorous way. So thanks, thank you.
Yeah.
And I will also say, since we've given shout outs to Lauren Winner and Barbara and Taylor already, I'll give a shout out to my spiritual director, whose name is Liz, and she was the one who taught me should is not a good word, and should, like, anytime when I'm with my spiritual director and I say or think the word should, she's like, that's not a God word. We're not going to use,
I like it.
not that we can't use it, but like that doesn't feel like a God word. So,
Yeah.
um, well, tell me, what else do you want to say about the book? It's a really, it's interesting. I will also say, while I have the mic, that I think the hard work shows, because the example you gave or the narrative you just provided about woe is me, and I think we all do that. Our own stories feel so fraught and important. Um, so, but also, I feel like you did deal with difficult subjects like your
Mm.
divorce and your custody battle. Having not known the story, I read, many of your readers, of course, will know you very well, but I wasn't familiar with your work. I didn't know your
Hmm.
background. And so I picked up on the through line of pain. I picked up on the through line of divorce and custody battle and sort of life falling apart. But I think you did not beat it over the head in a way
Mm.
that felt self-focused or something. So that's just
Yeah.
positive feedback. And so, I feel like the focus is largely on nature. And we are in such divisive and painful and caustic and scary times
Yeah.
globally and nationally and locally. So, tell us maybe more. How do you hope your, book might be sort of, or do you hope your book is kind of a balm to all that at a very difficult time, in
Yeah.
our
That's
personal culture?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, to take it from the macro down to like the micro level, obviously I've been involved in a very heated conflict in my own family and personal life. And it was a great gift to me. A couple weeks ago, I went with a friend of mine and we went to a pheasant hunting conference where I was speaking and trying to sell the book, and I left a copy of the book with his wife. And when I came back, we were unloading the truck, and his wife came out and she started talking to me about it. And one thing that was fascinating to me was she started crying when she was talking about the chapter about butchering a deer and how beautiful it was. And she loved that. I mean, she was like, I've never thought about it like that before. So you ask, like, what do I hope readers will get or whatever? What, I like that kind of experience of um uh I think that's probably some of my most fully realized writing is like the chapter on butchering deer. I really, really worked hard at that, knowing that's a sensitive subject for people. And yet 85% of Americans eat meat that they just grab at the grocery store and they don't think about who butchers it. So that was important to me. But then the other thing she said to your question about conflict that was uh fascinating to me is she said, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop as I was reading the book. Like at some point, he's going to air his dirty laundry about his ex wife in the book. And she said, and I'm glad you didn't. And that's what, of course, that's the message Lauren had to teach me is that this is not a book for you to air your dirty laundry or to teach everybody why you got custody and how you're the better man or whatever. And that's hard. I've already said I'm an Enneagram 8, kind of have a strong personality. So this all took so much time, and I guess I used to fight a lot, Kate. I mean, some people might remember back to when I was one of the top Christian bloggers in the world. But the reason I got a lot of page views was because I was picking fights on the internet all the time, and that's what drove eyeballs to my blog. And I'm just so over that. I'm so over it. And of course, that did not end up serving me well because that kind of aggro male energy is the very thing that when my life went south, people were like, "Oh, he deserved that because he's been a jerk for years." Um, and it was more of a persona, but nevertheless, I had to get much more in touch with myself and my own brokenness, which is then hard to write about. It's hard to write about. It takes a long time. I'm sure there are writers out there in the writing for your life community who have been writing and writing and struggling. And you even said it, you're trying to write, and it just, I'm not a patient person. I don't wait very well, but my gosh, I don't know that there's anything better if you're doing this kind of writing than just the go slow approach. It's not what our world rewards really, but I don't know that there's a better way to do it if you're writing personal stuff.
Well, and I think even if you're not, because again, the world is full of so much noise right now,
Yeah.
I think Amazon just limited the number of books you could self-publish to like 3 per day, right?
My God. That's
Right. So
insane.
like,
Oh
I
my
mean, three
gosh.
there 3 per day is like, you
Insane.
know, so like there's so much content and noise and screaming. I mean, so I think the quiet is the thoughtful, not just the quiet, because sometimes we need to be loud, but the thoughtfulness, the time that requires, rather than this instant. And you said slow down or something. And a colleague said to me recently, slow the roll, that
Mm,
phrase, slow the
mm,
roll. And I've
mm.
just been meditating it this whole Lent, like how can I slow the roll? How can I slow the conversation? How can I slow the pace down? Which I
Yeah.
think is a much more Jesus way than, you know, the rush culture, which I think
Yeah.
is the empire, so
Yeah. Yeah.
capitalism and all that stuff. So um well, anyway, this is a really interesting conversation, and we could talk a lot longer, I know, but we want to keep it short because people are busy and want to get back to
Yeah.
nature. So, what
Right.
else?
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts about the book? Are you working on anything new?
Well, I mean, the final thoughts on the book are basically that, when we're recording this, the book comes out next Tuesday. I've heard from people who've just gotten it over the weekend from Bookshop. I don't think Amazon has started shipping it yet. So I'm in that weird place as an author of like, I wonder if people will like this book. I basically like took my heart out of my chest and bled all over the page. But people probably might, if people are like, Tony wrote another book, I don't know, that it's that funny time of not knowing. So for me about the book, it's just like I'm talking to people about it. I'm trying to raise awareness, and now I'm going to see what God and the universe brings back to me. I don't know, but it's very sweet of you to speak kindly of it, and others have as well, which has been, obviously gratifying. And now I kind of sit on the edge of my seat and wait. Next, it's so people have joked like, what's going to be the sequel? And I know like Barbara or Mary Carr, these people write like sequels to their memoirs or whatever. I don't know. Can you do that? I've been writing fiction because I don't know if I have another one in me. This just like took it out of me. So who knows? I don't know, but I'm currently working on fiction. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that. And I think, this conversation is also reminding me about what I love about the Writing for Life community is because we are in community. We're in community as spiritual writers, as faith-based writers. And I just think I love how your questions echo in mine. Like
Mm,
I wrote a memoir and then a second memoir because it was like what I had to do. It was like what
yeah.
I just felt compelled, not because I wanted to be a memoirist or anything. So, I think some of this again just it's God's timing, God's pace. It's so anyway, I'll be keep us posted on how it goes and where God leads you. And I think also your thank you for sharing your story, including the painful parts, because I think so many writers imagine what you accomplish in the first phase of your career as the goal, and if we are not at that place, if we're not the celebrity blogger, getting the VIP interviews, then what's the point? We're not a success, right? And again, that's the message of the world, not the message of a peaceable kingdom. So, I just want to say it's interesting how you have had maybe this inverse journey
Hmm.
that many of us have, which is we have small books that few people read. Who knows how many people are going to
Yeah.
read your book, but that there's some other why to it that we don't know. And that's the life of a writer. And it's hard and scary and vulnerable and beautiful and challenging
And
and
the greatest, and the greatest. I mean, it's such a privilege to be able to write, to have somebody publish your words, to have marketing people and publicists trying to book you on podcasts. And it's I feel super blessed. I love the book. It's a beautiful book. I love the cover image. I love the
Yeah,
internal
that's beautiful.
images. I mean, I'm just couldn't be happier about how it turned out. Yeah.
Well, tell us who your publisher is and where we can find your work. And I actually have a final writing question for you because I know
Okay.
you're thinking about the craft and art of writing is. Do you,
Yeah.
speaking of writing for life being for faith-based writers or spiritual writers, so clearly your first books were Christian publishing. Do you consider this to be a faith-based book or faith spiritual book?
Okay. Kate, are we gonna talk about BISAC codes now? And because
No, no, no. That's not what I'm
no,
asking you. I'm asking
but
you
yes,
this, what do
this
you think? What do you think?
I know. I mean, this was a thing of with the okay, the publishing house is Roman and Littlefield, a 75-year-old publishing house based on the East Coast. They're independent, but it's big, really big, $150 million a year, but they have a ton of books. Most of the people watching this have a Roman and Littlefield book on their shelves, but it might not say Roman and Littlefield on the spine because they have so many imprints. They've bought up imprints, many Christian imprints they've bought up, as well as they do a lot of education and etc. Richard Brown is the editor there. He's building a list. He's fantastic. He is a gentle, soft spoken guy, which probably also influenced the book. Although the book was pretty much done when Jonathan and I brought it to him, um, but he's in that I think he resonates with that same quietness. He's awesome. So I'd recommend him for anybody out there who's looking to pitch a book because he's building a list it's a list in large part I think that's going to um try to find readers who are maybe disillusioned with church life, but still spiritual, the nuns or whatever, the spiritual but not religious, as well as, conventional Christian authors. But to your last question about writing, I mean, this was one of the things. It's like Richard and I went round and round because he has to pick 3 BISAC codes, and those are the codes that you give to Amazon and Library of Congress. And like, what is this book? You got to put this book in a silo. Is it a Christian living book? Is it a general spirituality book? Is it an outdoors book? Is it, and I'm like, it's all those things. I don't want it to, you know, um, I don't want it to be categorized. I remember I'm friends with a guy who's the drummer in the band Jimmy Eat World, which is kind of a famous emo band. They were the first emo band. And I once asked him, what's it like to be? He's like, look, we hated it, but once you get tagged, you can't. What are you going to do? Like, we're emo. We're always going to be emo. I think it's the same. So is this book a Christian book? This is my least Christian book. That doesn't mean it's not Christian, but it's my least Christian book in that it's not overtly Christian. There, as you've seen, there are a lot of resources in there that are from other religious traditions. There's a lot of philosophy in there. When I'm trying to make sense in a chapter like the chapter on death or the chapter on risk, I try to bring a lot of different resources to it, both Christian and non-Christian. So no, it is not an explicitly Christian book like my previous books, but definitely spiritual. Definitely a spiritual book.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And I would agree, having read most of it, and it's beautiful. Congratulations again on its forthcoming publication next week when we're recording this. And so we're recording in March 2024 and it's coming out in early April 2024. So that's great. And just remind us where we can learn more about your work, and if you're blogging or doing any kind of, where we can follow you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, the easiest place to go is just type in godofwildplaces.com, and that will take you to the page on my website that's dedicated to that book. So just godofwildplaces.com, run it all together. Um, and yeah, I write a weekly Substack, and I have a podcast, and I have other books, et cetera, et cetera. You can find those all if you go to that place. It'll eventually take you there. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you again for this conversation. It's been really interesting to hear more about your journey as a writer and your journey professionally and sort of spiritually. So Keep us posted on where you're being, what wild places you're being led to next. So
Thanks.
again, thanks to Tony Jones, the author of the forthcoming book, The God of Wild Places. Grateful for your time here with Writing for Your Life.
Thanks
Take
for
care.
having me.
Thanks again.